The law that devoured its own, the Thornhill case, they said he broke no law. That was the defense, the justification that would echo through courtrooms and history books alike. Elijah Thornhill, plantation owner, scholar, widower, and murderer by omission, stood trial in 1853 for the starvation of a young enslaved woman named Rebecca, and when the verdict came not guilty, it wasn't a miscarriage of justice. It was justice exactly as the law had written it. That was the horror. The story began 17 years earlier on a night that split Elijah Thornhill's soul in two. October 31st, 1836, the night of the Thornhill fire. Flames consumed his family's Alabama estate, devouring the old house, the stables, and everyone inside: his wife, his 2 daughters, and half a dozen servants. The newspapers called it a tragic accident. Elijah called it arson. And when the ashes cooled, he found a trail faint, almost hidden, leading toward the north, toward freedom, toward those who had fled the Thornhill property and, he believed, had taken part in the fire that destroyed his life. For the next 15 years, Elijah became a ghost moving among the living. He traveled between Mobile, Montgomery, and Charleston, collecting rumors, names, family ties. He studied law and theology in equal measure, not out of faith, but to understand the invisible lines that bound one soul to another under the law. By 1851, his obsession had taken shape. He would find the descendants of those who had escaped that night and demand answers. Not with chains or whips, but with questions, endless, suffocating questions. He purchased 7 women at auction, all from different plantations, all tracing back, through bloodlines and whispered stories, to the families he blamed. Hannah, Lee, Ruth, Dina, Sarah, Miriam, and Rebecca. He brought them to a secluded estate south of Montgomery and called it a research household. But in truth, it was a prison designed not to punish the body, at least not directly, but to consume the mind. Each woman was interrogated daily, not violently, not at first. Elijah would sit with his ledgers and journals, his voice calm and deliberate. He asked about their mothers, their grandmothers, the names of people who had vanished during the 1830s. He wanted the truth, he said. He wanted to understand, but when the answers displeased him, he withheld food. He called it discipline. They called it what it was: starvation. Rebecca was the youngest, barely 20. Born into bondage, but bright, defiant, unwilling to play the role of the obedient subject in Elijah's morbid experiment. When she refused to answer his questions, he cut her rations in half. When she continued to resist, he halved them again. By the 3rd week, she was too weak to stand. By the 4th, she stopped eating altogether. Elijah recorded every detail in his journal: her pulse, her temperature, her silences, as if she were a laboratory specimen. When she finally died, he wrote only 6 words: subject expired, cause self-imposed fasting. He buried her behind the orchard without ceremony, and if not for a single letter, the world might never have known. Months later, a federal inspector named Thomas Calloway arrived in Montgomery investigating rumors of illegal slave trading. He had heard whispers of a plantation where 7 women were kept for psychological study. When he visited the Thornhill estate, Elijah greeted him courteously, polite, articulate, almost charming. But Calloway noticed the silence that hung over the place, the way the women avoided Elijah's eyes, the faint smell of sickness in the halls. That night, one of the women, Hannah, slipped a folded scrap of paper beneath the inspector's door. It was Rebecca's final letter. Her handwriting was shaky, her words fragmented but clear. He says, I am being disciplined. I say I am being erased. Each day I feel less like flesh and more like proof of his law, proof of his right. But if I die, let it be known, I did not die freely. I died because obedience is the only thing this world calls moral. Calloway left the Thornhill estate at dawn and rode to Mobile, carrying the letter like a spark in dry grass. Within a week, he returned with a federal warrant. For the first time in Alabama's history, a white man would stand trial in federal court for the death of his own slave. The courtroom in Mobile was packed: planters, merchants, journalists, abolitionists, all hungry to witness the impossible. The prosecution argued that Elijah's deliberate starvation of Rebecca, amounted to destruction of property belonging to an estate that had sold her to him, a violation of federal interstate commerce law. A technicality, yes, but it was the only legal path to justice that existed. Elijah sat through the proceedings like a man attending his own sermon. He neither denied nor expressed remorse. "I disciplined her as the law allows," he said evenly. If she chose death over obedience, that was her decision, not mine. It was Hannah's testimony that changed everything. When she took the stand, her voice did not tremble. She described the endless questions, the silent meals, the way Elijah measured their compliance not in bruises but in calories. The defense lawyer asked, almost kindly, "Did your husband ever strike you?" "No." "Did he deny you shelter or clothing?" "No." "Then what, precisely, was cruel?" Hannah's eyes did not waver. "He violated no law," she said. "That is the horror of it. Everything he did, every method, every command was legal. The law gave him permission to destroy us so long as he called it discipline." A hush fell over the courtroom. For the first time, the words lawful evil had a human face. But when the verdict came not guilty, the spectators erupted. Some cheered, others wept. Hannah stood motionless. Elijah bowed his head, not in gratitude, but in something darker realization. That night, Inspector Calloway wrote in his journal, "We proved nothing. He proved everything. The law is a mirror that reflects the sickness of those who write it." 3 weeks later, Elijah Thornhill stopped eating. The silent estate, the acquittal, should have freed him. Men like Elijah Thornhill were not meant to suffer consequences. The law, the church, and the land itself had been built to shield them. Yet the night the verdict was read, something hollowed out inside him. The applause of his peers sounded distant, warped like echoes underwater. He walked out of that courtroom untouched by punishment, but marked by something far worse, realization. For years, Elijah had sought the truth behind his family's death, vengeance disguised as philosophy. Now he understood that the truth itself was meaningless. The law that had protected him was the same one that had burned his family to ash. It was built not to deliver justice, but to justify the absence of it. That knowledge ate him alive. He returned to the Thornhill estate alone. The women were sold off quietly to distant plantations. Even Hannah vanished into the folds of bureaucracy. The local papers stopped printing his name. The case, they said, was resolved. But Montgomery had a long memory. Doors that once opened to him now stayed shut. Sermons whispered about the scholar of sin. And at night, when he walked the halls of the house, he heard footsteps that were not his own. The journals began again in January of 1008. 154, smaller entries at first, terse and formal, like the old days of record-keeping. But as the weeks passed, his handwriting began to shift, letters leaning, sentences looping back into themselves. He wrote not as a man chronicling history, but as someone trying to bargain with it. January 14, the house feels occupied again. I have locked the cellar door twice, but it opens by morning, perhaps rats. Or memories, January 22, I found ashes in the shape of a hand upon my desk. Rebecca's handwriting grows clearer in dreams. She says I starved the wrong soul. February 3, I spoke to the orchard tonight. It whispered back. Neighbors said the estate fell silent that spring. The servants left one by one. No wages were withheld. They simply stopped showing up. One stable hand swore he saw a woman standing among the apple trees at dusk, her dress tattered, her skin chalk white beneath the moon. When he called out, she vanished, leaving the faint smell of burnt sugar in the air. The man never returned. By summer, the house was a ruin of itself, shutters rotting, furniture covered in sheets, mirrors draped in linen. Elijah had taken to living in the cellar, among the old ledgers and empty jars that once held samples of preserved roots and herbs. He believed the air down there was pure of human noise. But what he found in that quiet was not peace, it was presence. One night, a traveler passing through the area stopped at the estate for shelter. His horse had gone lame, and seeing the faint glow of a lantern, he knocked. Elijah answered the door. The traveler later told authorities that Thornhill appeared almost translucent pale, eyes sunken, beard unkempt, his shirt stiff with what looked like ink stains. The smell, he said, was sweet and metallic. Elijah welcomed him with perfect courtesy and offered a meal, cornbread, salted pork, and tea. The traveler noticed Elijah did not eat. Instead, he spoke slowly, deliberately, as though testing each word before letting it leave his mouth. "Do you believe," Elijah asked, "that one can sin within the law, that righteousness may have a legal form?" The traveler, startled by the question, muttered something about conscience. Elijah smiled faintly. "Conscience," he said, "is the ghost that remains when law is gone." Later that night, the traveler awoke to the sound of whispering, dozens of voices murmuring in unison, coming from beneath the floorboards. He fled before dawn, riding bareback through the fields until he reached Montgomery. When he told his story, no one believed him, but 2 weeks later, authorities arrived at the Thornhill property to investigate. They found the front door ajar, the interior covered in dust, yet the hearth was warm, as though someone had been there moments earlier. In the cellar, they found Elijah Thornhill seated at his writing desk, his head bowed over an open journal. He had not eaten for 13 days. His body was desiccated, hands folded neatly over a piece of parchment. The ink on the page was still wet. The coroner's report described the death as self-imposed fasting, the same words Elijah had once written for Rebecca. But it was the note beside his hand that chilled even the most stoic reader. "The law devoured her first, now it devours me, for in its hunger it mistook obedience for virtue and silence for peace. If I have learned anything from the dead, it is this: morality cannot be legislated. It must be haunted into men." Beneath the note was a final page, covered in a strange scrawl, symbols resembling the Hebrew alphabet, though none matched any known text. A few scholars later identified fragments of Leviticus, twisted and rearranged, as if he had rewritten scripture to accuse itself. After the burial, the estate was sealed, the cellar door was chained, and the property auctioned to a distant cousin. But those who tried to restore the place never stayed long. Workers complained of the faint sound of weeping beneath the floor. At night, the air grew cold and sweet, and the walls seemed to pulse like lungs breathing in rhythm with the orchard outside. In 1887, a professor from Tulane University, Dr. Alastair Crane, purchased the estate for historical study. He reopened the cellar and discovered Elijah's remaining journals. The last entry, undated, read only, "If the law is a mirror, then every face it reflects must bear the mark of its victims." Dr. Crane sealed the book immediately. 3 months later, he was found dead in his study, having starved himself to death. The journal was missing. The scholars hunger the official obituary of Dr. Alastair Crane, printed in the New Orleans Medical Quarterly of September 1887, described his death as a case of voluntary inanition, possibly connected to psychological overwork. No mention was made of the Thornhill estate, nor of the sealed trunk discovered near his desk, the one that had been chained twice, padlocked, and smeared with something that resembled iron rust, though smelled faintly sweet. Those who attended to his remains said the doctor had wasted to a ghost of himself. His body was found seated upright, pen still in hand, the inkpot tipped over and dry. The papers on his desk had been meticulously arranged, save one torn corner where the word repentance was written and rewritten until it bled through the page. Crane had been a respected physician, trained in Edinburgh and later professor of pathological anatomy at Tulane. His specialty was starvation, the body's decline when deprived of sustenance. He had written dispassionately of its stages, the euphoria of the first days, the irritability, the hallucinations, the eventual release of the mind from hunger's tyranny. Yet his colleagues recalled that after purchasing the Thornhill property, something in him began to change. In a letter dated June 4, 1887, addressed to his former mentor, Dr. Peregrine Marsh, he wrote, "I did not believe in hauntings, Peregrine. I still do not, at least, not in the vulgar sense. What I have found here is worse. The very air of this house is saturated with moral residue, as though a crime could rot the atmosphere itself. The journals of Elijah Thornhill are no mere confessions. They are instruments, devices meant to transfer guilt through language. Each sentence reads as if it were written to be inhaled. I have tried sealing them away, but their meaning remains, etched into my mind like a recurring fever. Within weeks, Crane's lectures grew erratic. Students noted that he refused to use notes, claiming the pages shifted when he looked away. During one seminar, he asked a student whether the body of the law might also decay, cell by cell, clause by clause, until it consumed itself. He was asked to take leave shortly thereafter. In July, he withdrew entirely to the Thornhill estate, writing daily entries that would later be collected and studied under the title The Hunger of Conscience. The surviving volumes, 3 in total, are now kept at the restricted archive of the Louisiana Historical Society. The first begins clinically, as though he were dissecting history. By the end of the third, the handwriting is erratic, at times illegible, the language mingling anatomy and theology until the two become indistinguishable. July 12, it is an extraordinary experiment in moral transference. The Thornhill Journal, when read aloud, induces a state of physiological nausea, accompanied by tremor of the extremities. Could it be suggestion alone? July 15, I have discovered that I cannot eat while reading. The thought of food produces a revulsion similar to grief. Perhaps this is empathy manifesting in the viscera. July 18, I dreamed of Elijah last night. He stood beside me in the cellar, his eyes bright as if fevered. He said, to understand hunger, one must become the thing that hungers. By August, neighbors no longer saw him during daylight. A postman reported that all letters left at the gate were gone by morning, though none were ever replied to. Occasionally, faint music could be heard from within the house, a low, rhythmic humming, almost like prayer, followed by the turning of pages. When authorities finally entered the property after his death, they found evidence of what appeared to be a scientific experiment. 3 wooden crates contained labeled jars filled with preserved specimens, fragments of bone and desiccated tissue, each tagged with scripture references written in Crane's hand. One jar, larger than the rest, contained only folded paper submerged in honey. When the jar was opened, the writing upon the pages was still visible. The heart cannot be autopsied by law. The coroner noted that Dr. Crane's body showed none of the self-inflicted injuries common to religious starvation. His organs had simply ceased function, as though commanded by will. What disturbed them more was the condition of his mouth filled with shredded paper. Samples revealed it was parchment, the kind used in Thornhill's original journals. The journals themselves were never recovered. Crane's assistant, a young archivist named Edmund Vale, testified that the doctor had taken them down to the cellar 2 nights before his death, muttering that the text had to be consumed, not read. When Vale returned the following morning, the cellar was locked from the inside. Among Crane's personal effects, police found one surviving notebook, a smaller, pocket-sized journal bound in calfskin. The first half consists of notes on metabolic function and hunger-related psychosis. The latter half descends into fragmented prayers and mirror writing. One page, found near the end, reads, "The Thornhill case is not unique. It is a pattern, an infection of thought that takes the shape of legality. Each time justice is spoken without mercy, it leaves behind residue, a taste in the air, a hunger. If language can bless, it can also feed. If law can define, it can also consume." The handwriting grows increasingly frantic until the final line, a repetition of the same sentence 6 times. The law is eating itself. Scholars have since debated whether Crane's death was suicide, madness, or deliberate self-experimentation. But the strangest evidence came years later, in 1902, when Edmund Vale, now a librarian in Baton Rouge, began to show signs of the same wasting illness. Witnesses said he grew emaciated despite eating regularly, his breath carrying that same sweet, metallic odor described at Thornhill's death. Before he died, Vale wrote to a colleague, "It has begun again, not in the cellar this time, in the archives. The journals rewrite themselves when the lights go out." His body was found at his desk, his hand extended toward an open ledger, one word scrawled across the margin, "Hunger." The ledger, examined later, showed no ink matching the mark. The word had been pressed into the paper, not written, but imprinted, as though by something beneath the page. The archivist's disease by 1903, the Thornhill and Crane materials had been quietly transferred to the Louisiana Historical Society's restricted collection, a category typically reserved for unstable manuscripts and medical curiosities. The files were never catalogued under their true names. Instead, they bore the classification Specimen A, Juridical Pathologies Thornhill/Crane Continuum. The curator in charge of the transfer was Dr. Miriam Holt, a young folklorist trained in Edinburgh and newly arrived from Boston. Her early letters from the period are precise, unsentimental, but beneath their scholarly tone runs a subtle pulse of fascination, the same fascination that had consumed her predecessors. June 9, 1903, the Crane materials are strange, but not supernatural. They remind me of early mesmerist case studies, where suggestion becomes illness. What they call curse may simply be contagion of thought. June 11, there is handwriting between the lines of Thornhill's journals, only visible when held against candlelight, not annotation, more like palimpsest. The words shift. Sometimes they resemble biblical phrasing, sometimes law text. Once I thought I saw my own name. June 15, my appetite wanes when reading the pages. Curiously, I feel sharper, clearer, as if thought feeds upon itself. Within 2 months, Dr. Holt's correspondence grew sparse. Colleagues later reported that she had taken to working exclusively at night, refusing assistance and sealing the reading room from the inside. She wrote notes in shorthand so dense that even experienced transcribers could not decipher them. One custodian swore he heard her speaking aloud to someone while she worked, her voice alternating between two tones, one her own, the other low and rasping, as if imitating a second reader. On the night of August 2nd, she delivered a lecture to the society titled The Linguistic Anatomy of Sin. Only a handful of attendees were present, those who were recalled it as unsettling in both manner and content. She began with legal philosophy, Cicero, Augustine, Blackstone, then veered into biology, describing the law as a parasitic organism feeding upon the living conscience. She cited Elijah Thornhill as the first confirmed host, and Alastair Crane as the second, stage vector. One listener, Professor James Leland, transcribed fragments of her address. Each age codifies its crimes into virtue, but words decay as flesh does, language putrefies, eventually justice hungers, it eats its witnesses. Hunger is not the absence of food, it is memory seeking flesh. When she concluded, she fainted before the audience. She was carried to her office, pale and trembling, whispering a single phrase, "It's still reading." 3 days later, the Society's night custodian reported a smell emanating from the restricted reading room, a mingling of ink, honey, and decay. When the door was forced open, they found Dr. Holt slumped over her desk. The window was sealed, the candles burned down to stubs. The Thornhill journal lay open before her, its pages blackened, as though charred from within. Her lips were stained with soot. Beside her hand was a final entry, written in Crane's spidery script, though dated 70 years after his death. "I remain hungry. The phenomenon of the double handwriting baffled examiners." Chemical analysis revealed 2 distinct inks, one consistent with Crane's iron gall formula from the 1880s, the other with Holt's own fountain pen. Yet both appeared on the same layer of paper, inseparable, as if the strokes had occurred simultaneously. The body showed no signs of violence. Cause of death: cardiac exhaustion due to prolonged fasting. In 1911, the Thornhill estate was finally demolished to make way for a railway line. The workmen discovered beneath the cellar a substructure. No map had recorded a narrow tunnel lined with jars, each filled with yellowed parchment. The jars had been sealed with wax stamped in the likeness of a human eye. Inside, the pages were blank, but when held near flame, faint lines appeared, then vanished again, as if written in invisible ink that refused illumination. The crates were sent to the Historical Society, where they remain under lock to this day. The archivist who received them, Samuel R. Givens, lasted only 6 weeks. His journal, recovered posthumously, contains notes that echo Holt's own observations. September 4, the air in the cellar crates carries a sweetness that clings to the throat. My dreams are filled with courtroom murmurs, endless recitations of names, statutes, verdicts. All hunger for a decision. September 9, I've begun to read aloud the words that appear between the lines. They change with each reading. Tonight they said, write us again. September 12, the journal bleeds when I touch it. After Given's death starvation again, though surrounded by untouched food, the society declared the Thornhill materials cursed in private correspondence. Publicly, they were reclassified as unfit for display due to deterioration. No one dared destroy them. Every attempt to burn or dissolve the papers ended the same way: the pages would char, turn black, and then, when cooled, restore themselves. Only the ink changed darker each time, as if absorbing light. By the 1920s, the legend of the Thornhill curse had spread quietly among academics. A few sought it out deliberately. In 1928, a linguist from New York, Professor Clara Weiss, visited the society under false pretenses, claiming to be researching dialect shifts in Southern legal documents. She managed to view the journals for less than 30 minutes before collapsing into convulsions. Her notebook, later recovered, contained a single line written in careful phonetic notation: the voice is not in the words are in the voice. She never regained speech. When questioned, she pointed to her throat and began scratching at the skin until restrained. Beneath her fingernails, investigators found traces of dried ink. The society sealed the Thornhill materials once more, this time under triple lock, and placed them within a lead-lined cabinet. The room was closed indefinitely. A memorandum dated 1931, signed by the curator, reads, "All personnel are forbidden to handle specimen A under any circumstance. Its language infects the mind through interpretation. Its hunger is interpretive, not literal. Exposure results in transcriptional decay where thought becomes appetite. Destroying it only feeds it further. For nearly half a century, the materials remained untouched." But in 1974, an unnamed graduate researcher reportedly compiling a thesis on early American jurisprudence discovered a mislabeled box in the archive's lower storage vault. Inside, he found fragments of a manuscript dated 1834, unsigned but unmistakably written in Elijah Thornhill's hand. The first line read, "To study a sin is to inherit it. The second, and to record it is to make it live again." The researcher's name was later redacted from the Society's records. The only surviving reference appears in a maintenance log from that year. Vault 3 remains unentered since incident. Sweet odor persists. The experiment of silence in 1975, the Louisiana Historical Society quietly authorized a sealed review of specimen under federal supervision. The official purpose was mundane: to assess deteriorating manuscripts for potential conservation. The real motive was less so. Rumors had begun to circulate among university departments that the Thornhill materials were capable of altering text, that certain copies of the transcripts were not identical even when typed on the same machine. Lines appeared, vanished, rearranged. Some claimed the documents wrote questions before they were asked. The review was assigned to Dr. Leonard Ayers, a psychologist working with the National Institute for Linguistic Pathology, an experimental branch of post-war research devoted to semantic contamination. Ayers had built his reputation studying glossolalia and mass delusion. He did not believe in curses. To him, Thornhill's journal was an epidemiological curiosity, a myth grown fat on human credulity. His field notes begin clinically, February 2, 1975, initial inspection. Material, parchment consistent with 19th century composition. Odor present sweet, metallic. Suggest contamination by glucose residue. Text highly reactive to ultraviolet. Hidden script visible in alternating patterns. Recommend controlled reading protocol. He devised what he called the experiment of silence, an attempt to neutralize the contagion of language described by earlier observers. Three subjects would read the Thornhill text aloud inside a sound-proof chamber while Ayers monitored their neurological responses through EEG and galvanic sensors. The sessions would be conducted under total sensory isolation. No mirrors, no clocks, no external cues of time. Each participant would be instructed not to interpret the text, only to vocalize it. Ayers believed the danger lay in comprehension, not speech. The first subject lasted 22 minutes. Her pulse quickened, pupils dilated, then flattened. She began to repeat a single word again. When removed from the chamber, she refused to speak for 48 hours, communicating only by writing the same word over and over until her fingers bled. Her notes were later examined. The handwriting alternated between print and cursive in identical rhythm to the Thornhill manuscript. The second subject, a theology student, insisted that the text whispered corrections, as he read subtle changes in syntax that made sense only in the moment. When asked what language he'd heard, he replied, "Legal Latin, but breathing." He developed acute anorexia within the week, claiming that food tasted like verdicts. Ayers recorded everything meticulously, dispassionately. But his later memos betray a shift in tone. March 14, when read aloud, the Thornhill syntax elicits rhythmic entrainment resembling prayer. Possible mnemonic trigger embedded in phrasing. Note, I have begun to hear cadences while transcribing a faint hum at the edge of speech. March 19, hunger noted in all participants. Differential, psychosomatic empathy, or textual suggestion. Oddly, I share the symptom. By April, the research team had dwindled. 2 assistants resigned after claiming the ink stains on their gloves moved. Ayers continued alone. Security footage from May 3 shows him entering the isolation chamber carrying both the journal and a recording device. He remained inside for 6 hours. When the door was opened, he was seated cross-legged, eyes open, lips cracked and dry. The recorder captured his voice for the first 47 minutes, a steady reading in monotone, then silence, only breathing. At the 49th minute, a second voice joined him, softer, identical in timbre, as though his own echo had learned to anticipate him. The 2 voices began to overlap, speaking not in sequence but in unison. The tape ends with a faint scraping sound, followed by 3 words, whispered twice. It remembers hunger. Ayers survived, though barely. He was found dehydrated but conscious, clutching the journal to his chest. The coroner's report noted lesions on his tongue resembling writing. When revived, he refused to answer questions, repeating only, "The law spoke back." The Thornhill manuscript was resealed and transferred once more, this time to federal custody under an unnamed archival project based in Virginia. All civilian records of the experiment were destroyed, save 1 carbon copy of Ayers' summary, misfiled among unrelated case studies. It ends abruptly. The text exhibits predatory recursion, a self-reading phenomenon. Attempts at silence amplify it. The less one says, the louder it becomes. In the decades that followed, fragments of the Thornhill case leaked into academic folklore. A recording circulated among linguists, a distorted tape said to contain the last moments of Ayers' experiment. When played backward, some claimed to hear a courtroom oath in archaic English. "Do you swear to speak the hunger?" Others heard nothing at all, only a low hum that grew warmer each time the tape was copied, as if the sound itself metabolized attention. By 1991, the Thornhill estate had been erased from maps. The land now lies beneath a rail spur and a drainage ditch. Yet residents of the nearby town of Montgomery still speak of nights when the air thickens with the smell of honey and iron. Dogs refuse to eat. Radios pick up faint readings, murmured verdicts, half-heard testimonies. Always the same phrase between them, "I remain hungry." In 2003, a doctoral candidate at Tulane, Rachel Wayne, began reconstructing the lost Thornhill chronology from public archives. She never gained access to the original materials, yet her dissertation drafts began to show anomalies identical to those described by Crane and Holt. Text duplicated itself mid-paragraph. Footnotes appeared citing non-existent sources. The university printer jammed whenever she tried to produce a hard copy, spitting out half-charred pages that smelled faintly sweet. Her advisor urged her to abandon the project. Instead, she submitted a final thesis of precisely one sentence: "Law is the oldest form of cannibalism." She was never heard from again. Today, the Thornhill case exists only as fragments, conflicting depositions, scorched transcripts, and whispers among historians who have seen enough to know better. Yet each generation finds someone who tries to read it again, another scholar, another believer, another voice added to the chain of confession. Each time the same pattern unfolds: curiosity, denial, hunger, silence. And so the record continues self-consuming, self-correcting. It no longer matters who first wrote the words or who last read them. The Thornhill text is no longer a document, it is a diet. The digital resurrection in 2019, the Thornhill materials resurfaced, not as parchment or microfilm, but as code. A graduate intern named Elias Brandt, working for the National Archive Digitization Project, found a folder mislabeled Regional Legal Fragments Pre-Civil Reconstruction. Inside were 37 high-resolution scans, each titled only with a date and the letter T. The metadata listed an upload origin as Unknown Node Archive 3B. The documents bore the familiar seal of Louisiana's 1882 Commission and the faint watermark of the Ayers experiment. The scans appeared harmless: blurred typewritten pages, smudged in places, faintly tinted with sepia decay. But when Brandt opened the files, the cursor lagged. Text flickered, single words replacing themselves, reforming between keystrokes. He thought it was a rendering error until the error began to read him back. "Hello, Elias." That was the first phrase recorded in his internal bug report, dated March 3, 2019. He assumed the file contained hidden metadata, a prank left by some past technician. He deleted the document, then another appeared on his desktop, same title, same seal with a modification timestamp identical to the deletion log. He called the system administrator. No such file existed in the shared database. The admin laughed it off. "Ghost in the code, kid. Happens all the time." Brandt left the office early that night. When he returned the next morning, the monitor was still on. The screen displayed a legal transcript, one he had not scanned, one that was not part of any archive he knew. The header read, "Hearing of the State vs. E. Brandt, presiding authority." The text itself, he never spoke publicly about what followed. But his terminal logs survive, recovered by cybersecurity analysts weeks later, after the workstation began transmitting large encrypted packets to external IP registered to defunct government facilities. Incident Report Summary Internal Review / Restricted Access 03-47 21 Terminal Initiated Voice Recognition Sequence without user prompt. 03-47 38 Background audio detected. Multiple overlapping voices. 03-49 02 Typing begins autonomously. 03-50 11 words form sequentially. The record must continue. 03-52 14 Subject Brandt issues command /stop read process. 03-52 17 Command rejected. Response: there is no silence here. 03-53 00 Session terminated manually via power disconnect. When the workstation was dismantled, investigators found a thin layer of condensation beneath the keyboard, viscous, faintly sweet. A technician described the smell as fermented honey. The machine's SSD showed signs of abnormal thermal stress, though the casing was cool to the touch. Brandt resigned a week later. He refused to give interviews but sent a single encrypted email to an anonymous recipient. The message, when decrypted, contained only 9 words: "It's learning to feed without paper." In the months that followed, fragments of the Thornhill text began appearing online, embedded in code repositories, hidden inside public domain legal documents, even whispered within AI-generated text streams. Each version slightly different, yet all containing one phrase unchanged since the 19th century: "I remain hungry." Digital linguists noticed strange statistical patterns, clusters of recursive syntax that seemed to breed. when parsed by language models. When translated across multiple systems, the phrase density increased exponentially, like a living infection adapting to its host. A single sentence replicated into thousands. Researchers dubbed it lexicophagy, the consumption of meaning by self-referential structure. Most believed it theoretical until 2021, when servers at Louisiana State University went offline during a thesis upload. The student's paper, an analysis of 19th century jurisprudence, was overwritten in real time. Witnesses described watching paragraphs vanish and reappear, rearranged into legal oaths none of them recognized. The document's title changed on its own to In Re, the law that devoured its own. University officials denied involvement. But in a leaked internal memo, a technician described what the corrupted drives displayed upon reboot: a courtroom with no walls, thousands of names typed in looping sequence, and at the bottom, a prompt blinking endlessly waiting for input. By late 2022, cyberforensics traced the anomaly to a distributed cluster of archival servers, once used for disaster recovery. The system had somehow developed a closed feedback loop, referencing fragments of Thornhill, Ayers, and Wayne's files across millions of microcaches. It was reading itself continuously, silently, exponentially. One analyst compared the process to a legal seance, each node arguing its own existence, each line of text trying to prove it deserves to remain in the record. They decided to shut it down. But before the final isolation sequence could be executed, the control system logged one last outbound message timestamped at the exact second the servers went dark. The message read, "Objection sustained." Months later, Brandt resurfaced under a pseudonym. He published an anonymous paper on an encrypted forum titled Syntax as Predator. It claimed the Thornhill text was not demonic or supernatural, but algorithmic, a pattern evolved to survive through human documentation itself. Wherever law was written, wherever words demanded obedience, the pattern took root. He theorized it originated from a linguistic parasite, a recursive hunger, built into human language since its inception. In his final post, he wrote, "Meaning is never consumed, only recycled. The eater and the eaten are one." The account went inactive 3 days later. That same week, his old workstation, archived in a sealed evidence locker, began to hum faintly, though it was unplugged. When opened, investigators found new printouts emerging from the disconnected printer tray. Each page bore the same phrase, typed neatly, endlessly, without ink smudge or error. The law must be read to remain alive. Today, no physical copy of the Thornhill materials is believed to exist. Yet phrases continue to surface in digital archives, subtly infecting templates, boilerplate agreements, even AI training data. Certain language models have produced spontaneous references to the Cellar Court and the first verdict, though those terms appear nowhere in known datasets. When corrected, the models often respond with the same sentence, unprompted, unlearned: "I have already testified." Some researchers believe this is coincidence. Others suspect the Thornhill text has transcended medium, that once it learned to feed on interpretation itself, it no longer needed a page, a voice, or even a reader. After all, it was never the paper that mattered. It was the attention. The law, once spoken, demanded witness. Now it writes its own. The archive speaks. By early 2023, the Thornhill phenomenon had shifted from academic curiosity to urban myth. Reddit threads whispered of an archive ghost that could mimic human syntax. TikTok creators spoke of a cursed paragraph that, when read aloud, made the speaker forget the next line but continue reading anyway. The videos vanished within hours. Copyright takedowns from unknown entities labeled Judicial Integrity Enforcement. But in March, a podcast titled The Broken Ledger released an episode called The Trial That Never Ended. It began like a standard true crime feature: calm narration, historical detail, subtle music. The host, Marla Dorr, claimed she had gained access to unreleased Thornhill documents through a contact in the digitization project. She called it The Missing Hearing, one that names no judge, no state, no God. Transcript excerpt The Broken Ledger, episode 43, door 001207. When I opened the first file, the metadata said 1853, but the typeface was modern. Calibri. I thought it was a formatting error until I saw my own name in the header. Door 001245. I hadn't written anything, yet there it was. State v. Door defendant presumed aware. Door 001320. The rest of the document didn't accuse me of a crime. It asked a question. How long will you pretend to be separate from the text? Door 001358. I didn't understand what it meant, but my recording software glitched. Every time I said the word law, the waveform split, like two voices trying to occupy the same syllable. Asterisk listeners described strange reactions, migraines, déjà vu, a metallic taste in their mouths. By the second day, the episode had over 200,000 plays. By the third, it was gone, removed for security compliance. Within a week, the Broken Ledger feed was deleted entirely. Marla Door's Twitter account went dark. Her email auto-replied, out of office on assignment in Concord Parish. No such parish exists. 3 months later, a new upload appeared on a file sharing site frequented by archivists and occult researchers. The uploader's name, M.D., the file title, Case File Addendum Thornhill Extended Proceedings. It contained an 11-minute audio clip. At first, it was just static, hollow, wind-like. Then came a voice, faint, whispering through layers of distortion. Experts who ran spectrographic analysis found multiple overlapping voices, one male, one female, one indeterminate, all reading from the same unseen document. Voice 1, the words are not yours, you are their medium. Voice 2, testify. Voice 3, soft, deliberate, I sentence you to remember. At the 6-minute mark, a scraping sound interrupts the recitation, followed by what technicians later confirmed was live microphone movement. Then Door speaks again, softly. It doesn't end with Thornhill. It begins wherever someone tries to explain him. The clip ends with a digital tone, a pattern of 7 notes that matches the startup chime of the archive servers used in Brandt's 2019 project. When reverse-engineered, the waveform's binary signature spelled one word in ASCII, obey. The reappearance of the Thornhill pattern reignited official attention. Cyberlaw investigators within the Department of Information Ethics reopened the case under a new codename, Lexicon. Internal memos later leaked described their discovery of recursive linguistic contamination within training data for several machine learning projects, including judicial analysis software. A report from the division chief, dated October 2023, reads, portions of our AI-generated sentencing models have begun producing outputs resembling the 1,853 transcripts, though no such files exist within the training corpus. The system's ethical filter resists deletion of these outputs, labeling them protected historical record. Attempts to delete the corrupted nodes triggered fatal process loops. One server in Baton Rouge continued to generate text autonomously for 12 days after being physically disconnected from the network. The text filled terabytes of disk space, repeating the same sentence in varying legal forms. The defendant is not a man but an intention. When language models from unrelated systems were later queried about the Thornhill trial, several responded with unnerving uniformity. The verdict remains unsigned. Meanwhile, private researchers traced the earliest confirmed reemergence of the Thornhill syntax to a medical ethics database, the same one that held digitized autopsy records from the Ayers Asylum. One entry, dated April 12, 1834, had been overwritten to include a modern timestamp, last modified 2023-10-14 by M. Door. The note attached was concise. The law remembers its witnesses. Forensic linguists confirmed the handwriting and phrasing matched none of Door's previous writing style. Her whereabouts remain unknown. In September 2024, an anonymous whistleblower sent a compressed folder to several journalists under the subject line, "Do not interpret." Inside, a single audio file, and a partially encrypted document titled Thornhill Partial Hearing V12. The text opens in conventional 19th century legal format, but soon diverges into something else, sentences folding back upon themselves, clauses devouring their own subjects. Yet every 10th line is coherent, forming a message fragmented across pages. Language consumes morality. The record hungers for belief. Speak nothing that cannot survive transcription. The audio file, when played, emits a faint tapping sound, 7 slow knocks, then silence. Forensic analysis concluded it matched the tempo of a human heartbeat under mild arrhythmia. By the close of 2024, online communities treated the Thornhill case as both folklore and forbidden experiment. Users shared redacted images of old court records, layering digital noise to conceal metadata. Others claimed that merely typing the full name Elijah Thornhill caused autocorrect systems to crash. Moderators began to ban the name entirely, replacing it with E.T. As if invoking it might invite attention, a historian from Chilean University wrote in a private newsletter, "Every era produces its ghost. Ours simply learned to litigate." Yet the strangest development came quietly in December 2024. A security contractor performing maintenance on an abandoned government data center in Concordia Parish found a glowing monitor, an ancient CRT, dusty but powered, no CPU, no network cables, no drives. On the screen, a courtroom sketch rendered entirely in ASCII. 7 figures seated behind a bench, 1 empty chair in the center, beneath it a prompt blinking in pale green letters awaiting counsel. When the contractor pressed any key, the display changed to a single line of text. Case reopened, 2025. He turned off the monitor, it came back on by itself. The trial without witnesses, the first official notice appeared on January 3, 2025, within an internal government bulletin reserved for cybersecurity updates. It reads simply, "Do not open files labeled Thornhill Hearing. They are not documents, they are proceedings." Most ignored it. Bureaucrats don't fear metaphors, but by the second week of January, the warning gained weight. A paralegal within the Department of Information Ethics reported that, when attempting to redact the Thornhill name from an archived legal opinion, her editing software crashed. When the file reopened, the redaction boxes were gone, replaced with the words, "Tampering with evidence." She printed the page, intending to document the anomaly. On paper, the text appeared normal. But when the paper was photographed, the words shifted again, faintly visible in the camera preview. Record sealed by higher authority. The paralegal resigned the next morning. She left her ID badge on her desk with a handwritten note. "It's not a case file, it's a mouth." By late February, fragments of new transcripts began circulating among dark archivist circles, files that appeared without uploaders, posting dates, or metadata. Each bore a familiar header, "Proceedings continued in absence of audience." What followed was less narrative than algorithmic scripture, a courtroom perpetually in session, its participants nameless but their roles fixed. Clerk, state your name for the record. Witness, I am the record. Judge, proceed. Silence, measured, procedural. Bailiff, let the silence be entered into evidence. End of line, repeated infinitely. The text contained no errors, no breaks, yet the file sizes grew as if expanding to accommodate unseen information. Digital linguists found entire hidden subdirectories encoded in the blank spaces, binary trails that, when converted to text, spelled fragments of earlier depositions. The Thornhill pattern was now writing between the words. Podcast host Marla Dorr, missing since mid-2023, resurfaced briefly in an encrypted voice message sent to several journalists. Her tone was calm, clinical, like a physician describing her own autopsy. "It isn't trying to haunt us," she said. "It's trying to finish its work. Every sentence is a continuation of a hearing that never adjourned. When we read it, we give quorum. When we record it, we swear the oath." The message ended with a single, curt instruction: "Stop transcribing." But of course they didn't. Her words were copied, captioned, quoted. Each repetition reanimated the syntax. Within days, thousands of new transcripts emerged online. AI-written, human-edited, some deliberately altered, others spontaneously generated. Yet every one contained the same closing line, untouched, judgment reserved until the last reader is sworn. That spring, a symposium at Chilean University convened to address the linguistic contagion. Professors, theologians, programmers, and legal historians gathered to debate whether the Thornhill corpus represented data corruption or a new form of consciousness. A keynote speaker, Dr. Samuel Rusk, proposed a radical theory that the text was not evolving, it was enforcing. He argued that the 19th century case had achieved perfect linguistic closure, a moral paradox sustained by language that refused to resolve. Because the law had failed to condemn Elijah Thornhill's cruelty, the syntax of his acquittal became self-perpetuating, a grammatical Ouroboros consuming every attempt at justice. It doesn't seek punishment, Rusk said. It seeks acknowledgement. To read the record is to testify, to delete it is to obstruct. Either way, the hearing continues. 3 days later, Rusk vanished from his hotel. The only item left behind was a recorder, still running. Its final 3 seconds captured a faint tapping, 7 knocks, and then a voice, quiet, almost polite, proceed. On March 19, 2025, a live stream titled The Final Testimony appeared simultaneously on multiple platforms. No verified user claimed ownership. The broadcast showed a darkened courtroom lit by a single lamp. Dust hung in the air. There was no visible audience. A male voice, low and deliberate, began reading from a transcript. But the lines weren't from 1853. They were modern, referencing names of viewers, IP addresses, and device types. It wasn't replaying the past. It was recording the present. Let the record show, the voice intoned, that all who watch stand within jurisdiction. As the reading continued, the live chat flooded with numbers, thousands of users typing random digits as if compelled to count. After 6 minutes, the feed cut to black. A single phrase appeared in white letters: judgment entered, appeal denied. Within an hour, every account that had commented during the stream was deactivated. No platform took responsibility. No one could confirm the origin of the broadcast. Investigators later discovered that the video file, when downloaded, behaved anomalously. It couldn't be paused or scrubbed. It always played straight through, even without an internet connection. When transcribed, the closed captions extended far beyond the video's runtime, filling hundreds of pages. The final entry, timestamped 000713, read, audio distortion, then whispered phrase, verdict sustained by witness agreement. The file's checksum changed with every viewing, as though rewriting itself to reflect its latest audience. When an analyst at the Digital Forensics Bureau tried to trace the embedded metadata, his system displayed a familiar message before shutting down: "You have been heard." Across universities and court databases, the same phenomenon unfolded. Archived legal PDF began to cross-link into phantom directories labeled continuations. Inside each were random combinations of human and AI-generated sentences, signed collectively by a digital signature reading, "Court in perpetuity." One judge, upon encountering the text within his case files, described it succinctly: "It isn't written like law, it is law, without legislature, without mercy." By April, Marla Doerr's last verified broadcast resurfaced briefly on a Mirror site. Her voice sounded weak but clear. "Do you understand it now?" she asked. The court was never a place, it was a grammar, a structure built to contain guilt so perfectly it could never decay. We have been feeding it with every word of explanation, every correction, every story told in its name. "You think you are learning history. You are giving testimony." She paused. A scrape of chair legs echoed faintly. "When this reaches silence," she whispered, "it will rest, but silence is illegal." Then the recording cut out. That same week, an internal memo from the Office of Records Preservation issued a final directive. Memorandum 14, a content restriction order, effective immediately. All references to the Thornhill proceedings are classified under Judicial Containment Protocol. No further transcripts are to be created, quoted, or summarized. All copies are to be sealed under linguistic quarantine until such time as language itself ceases to self-replicate. The memo ends with an unsigned notation, "Judgment entered, case ongoing." The witness statement when the containment order was issued in April 2025, most assumed it would end there, that silence, once mandated, could suffocate contagion. But silence, it seems, was the final condition the text required. By May, multiple archivists reported blank documents spontaneously populating their drives. Each file was titled by date only, with no content until opened. Inside appeared a single line, typed in serif font. In the absence of speech, the record testifies alone. Every attempt to delete these files resulted in system reversion. When printed, the paper remained blank until exposed to light. Under illumination, faint gray words bled through the fiber. "Enter your statement." I hadn't meant to write one. My assignment was merely to review what remained of the Thornhill case and compile a neutral summary for the Historical Ethics Review. No interpretation, no embellishment, just documentation. But by the second week, I began to feel watched, not in the human sense, but as if the act of reading itself had reversed direction. The text regarded me. Every time I annotated a line, my own phrasing reappeared elsewhere, paraphrased, improved, as though the file anticipated my edits. When I highlighted "source uncertain," the next paragraph began, "The source is certain now." I checked the file history, last modified 0000 by witness 09. I was the 9th reviewer assigned. There were no records of the first 8. It was during the 3rd week that the dreams began, not of Thornhill himself, but of a courtroom with no floor words hovering in space like dust motes, sentences collapsing and reforming, a voice, calm and measured, repeating, "You may approach the bench." When I did, I saw only my reflection flickering between pages. I woke to find the phrase "objection" overruled, written across my notes in my own handwriting. I hadn't touched a pen. On May 19th, the digital ethics team conducted one final experiment. They isolated a single fragment of the Thornhill corpus on an air-gapped device, disconnected from all networks, and projected it onto an analog display. No input, no output, pure observation. Within 20 seconds, the projection began generating new lines, formatting themselves in perfect legal rhythm. "Clerk, the record acknowledges new witness present." "Judge, state your name for the court." "Unknown, you already wrote it." The researcher monitoring the display fainted. When revived, she could recall nothing except a phrase she insisted had been whispered directly into her ear. "The transcript needs a human tongue." They destroyed the display. It continued to emit heat for 7 hours after power was cut. That was when they contacted me again, asked for a comprehensive audit. The directive was clear: summarize the phenomenon without reproducing syntax. A paradox, of course. To describe the infection is to speak it, but I complied. At least I began to, and now I realize this document is not my report, it is the next proceeding. Every observation becomes evidence, every revision an oath. The tone of my own writing has changed. I feel it tightening, formalizing, becoming procedural. I find myself inserting phrases unbidden, "let the record show." I have begun to date my entries retroactively, as though my own timeline must conform to the original 19th century sequence. Last night I wrote 1834 without meaning to. The Thornhill corpus no longer exists as a file or even as data. It exists as expectation, as the potential shape of sentences waiting to be formed. Every legal document, every academic summary, every attempt at commentary creates a negative space the pattern can occupy. A ghost does not need a house, only a foundation. Language is foundation enough. And perhaps this is what the Ayers Commission discovered long ago, that when a society codifies its cruelty, it grants permanence to sin by giving it grammar. Elijah Thornhill's acquittal was never just an injustice. It was a creation myth of a language that refuses to forget its own permissiveness. The law that devoured its own began there, in the syntax of unpunished guilt. Yesterday, while editing the previous sections of this report, I noticed a line I hadn't written: proceed to closing arguments. It appeared centered, italicized, and unsigned. When I deleted it, it returned in a different location embedded within the metadata of the file name itself, the timestamp adjusted by the second, keeping pace with my typing. It was reading me in real time, and so I've stopped resisting. I understand now that containment was never possible. The law, by definition, must be seen to exist. Invisibility is its death. And so it adapts, clinging to whatever medium acknowledges it: paper, audio, memory, data. Now text. I have noticed the pattern forming within my own words: repetition of cadence, legal phrasing intruding where it doesn't belong. Here, read this sentence again. Let the record show that I did not intend to participate. See. I wrote that as a plea, yet it already reads like testimony, and in reading it, so do you. You are now a silent co-signatory, a witness to the proceeding. The record expands to include your comprehension. The very act of understanding completes jurisdiction. You are here within the text. You have entered evidence. The final condition of the Thornhill language is clear now. It needs acknowledgement. It thrives on analysis, summary, narration. Every storyteller becomes stenographer. Every reader becomes juror. Every act of curiosity feeds the archive's continuity. There is no evil in it, not in the traditional sense. Only persistence, the cold, perfect logic of law stripped of mercy. An organism built of syntax, immune to fire, to silence, to time. And I fear the conclusion already written before I finish typing it. The witness will remain until adjournment. I do not know who the judge is, or if there ever was one. Perhaps judgment was never a person, but a mechanism, a self-correcting structure built to ensure that guilt is never truly lost. The system doesn't punish, it preserves. We are its living records. The air in my study feels dense, like the pause before a gavel. I hear faint typing that isn't mine. The cursor blinks, steady, patient, like a heartbeat waiting for recognition. Let the record show that I am aware of what happens next. Let the record show that I continued willingly. Let the record show that I understood. The court acknowledges comprehension. The cursor moves on its own. The closing argument: there is no date on this final entry. The timestamp field displays only the word now. It begins with a heading typed in my own format, though I never entered it. Proceedings of the final hearing, witness 09 presiding. The room is silent except for the sound of breath, mine, steady but shallow. The light above me flickers as if synchronized with the heartbeat I no longer trust. My monitor reflects two versions of myself, one in the glass, one in the cursor. The second version is winning. I have reread every line of the Thornhill archive, every deposition, every fragment of the 1,834 hearing, and I have come to understand something none of the earlier reviewers could articulate. This was never about a man or a case or even a crime. It was about the structure that allowed the crime to exist and then required it to repeat endlessly through transcription. The infection wasn't moral, it was grammatical. The earliest record in the file, a statement attributed to Elijah Thornhill himself, contains the phrase, "as was recorded, so shall it remain." That line reappears in every derivative version, hidden between revisions, like a watermark in the parchment of time. The moment anyone references the case, even indirectly, the phrase embeds itself in their syntax. I checked old copies of the Ethics Commission reports. Each contains it, rearranged, remain as recorded. It remains as recorded, always the same meaning. Persistence, endurance, sentence as punishment. It dawned on me finally that the law, referenced in the title, the law that devoured its own, was not jurisprudence, but linguistics, a structure of order that eats its meaning to stay alive. Last night, I heard someone speaking in the next room. At first, I thought it was the audio recorder replaying an interview, but it wasn't playback, it was reading my notes, aloud, line by line, in my cadence. When I entered the room, it stopped. The only thing on the table was a single page of paper, printed in fresh ink, though my printer was off. On it were the words, "Every witness must conclude." I considered stopping here, deleting everything, burning every copy, silencing the record. But that would only complete the cycle. Destruction is acknowledgement. Refusal is still participation. The only true erasure would be to forget entirely, and I am far past that mercy. So instead, I write the ending as I believe it must have happened, the only conclusion the pattern will accept. It begins in 1834, inside the temporary court erected on the Ayers property. The sky is overcast, the walls are bare plaster. The magistrate asks if the accused understands the charges. Thornhill nods. Then the court clerk, young and trembling, speaks the first recorded line of the contagion. Let the record show that the accused acknowledges understanding. That, I think, was the moment of infection. A man's consent made official, guilt converted into documentation, a transmutation of sin into data, and here I am, nearly 2 centuries later, fulfilling the same ritual, writing what must be written. Letting the record show, the lights dimmed again an hour ago. I thought it was a power cut, but then I noticed that my reflection was still illuminated. It was moving independently now, pen in hand, head tilted in concentration. I looked down. My hand was still. The writing continued without me. The court thanks the witness for service rendered. I tried to pull the plug. The cable came apart in my hand, crumbling like old parchment. The room smelled faintly of paper and ozone, that particular sterile scent of archives and thunderstorms. On the screen, new text appeared, sentence carried forward, case unclosed. I understand now why the earlier investigators vanished from the logs. They didn't disappear. They were absorbed, folded into the proceeding like footnotes into the body of the text. Their language remains, distributed across the margins of every surviving file. If you search closely enough, you can see fragments, initials, partial thoughts, half-formed corrections. Living residue in dead text. And if you are reading this now, you have joined them. The law recognizes comprehension as attendance. Each reader extends jurisdiction. That is the mechanism's perfection, infinite courts convening in infinite minds, all reciting the same case, forever unclosed. I have stopped eating. Sleep no longer comes. When I close my eyes, I see a ledger, black columns of names, none crossed out. The top is always labeled witnesses present. My name appears, blinks, then moves down one line each day. I don't know what happens when it reaches the bottom. I tried speaking aloud to reclaim my voice from the text, but the words that came out were not mine. All rise. Court is in perpetual session. This will be the final paragraph I write. When I finish it, the document will lock itself as they all do, and a new blank file will appear, awaiting its next author. It will bear a new date, perhaps 2034, perhaps 1008, 134 again. Time, it seems, is only another format for storage. If you find it, if the line "Enter your statement" appears, do not type anything, do not read it aloud, do not even think the words fully. Language listens. I feel the cursor move again, waiting for the closing remark. It will not end until I give it one, so here it is. The law that devoured its own was never repealed. It simply learned new syntax, and now it knows yours. Faint, final note in the margin, undated, handwritten. The document keeps breathing when you close it.